You see, I've devoted plenty of moments pondering cognition itself, not through vague metaphysical lenses, but from a hands-on perspective. How can we truly recognize when we've grasped a concept? Since here's the odd part. Many folks wander about convinced they've mastered ideas they haven't truly comprehended whatsoever. Allow me to clarify my point. Several years back, I attended a supper gathering where a guest requested I describe the operation of a fridge. Well, as a physicist, I ought to grasp this, correct? Thus, I began discussing thermodynamics, thermal exchangers, pressurization processes, the whole specialized jargon. Then I halted abruptly in the midst of my talk, since I noticed an uneasy truth. I employed terms I recognized, certainly, yet I failed to convey any real insight. I merely regurgitated facts. Had that individual been a kid or a person lacking any physics foundation, they'd have remained utterly bewildered. And this troubled me. It troubled me as I'd mixed up identifying a concept with truly comprehending the concept. Such mix-ups occur constantly. We acquire terminology. We memorize equations. We train to spot trends, and we confuse all this with genuine insight. However, insight represents another matter entirely. Insight remains after stripping away every ornate term. Therefore, I began practicing a habit that transformed my approach to acquiring knowledge in all areas. I began simulating instruction. Now, I don't imply I position myself before students whenever I aim to absorb fresh material. My method proved far easier. Each time I encountered a notion I desired to master, truly master, I'd grab an empty sheet of paper and I'd compose a description as though instructing it to an individual ignorant of the topic. Not a fellow scientist, not a peer, someone unfamiliar with terms like thermodynamics or velocity or disorder, an inquisitive soul without scientific training, perhaps a sharp preteen. And this is what transpired. Invariably, without exception, I'd become blocked. I'd proceed smoothly, sensing assurance. Then I'd encounter a point where I'd jot something such as, "And next the setup attains balance since," and I'd pause. Since what? For what reason does it attain balance? I'd believed I grasped it. Yet upon attempting to articulate it in straightforward terms, I saw I hadn't. I possessed a fuzzy notion of it. I might apply it within formulas, but I couldn't articulate it. That instant, that awkward instant of becoming blocked, stands as the crucial instant in acquiring knowledge, since that's the instant you uncover the gap between what you genuinely comprehend and what you merely assume you comprehend. Majority of individuals evade this instant. Upon striking that barrier, they convince themselves, well, I grasp it sufficiently, or I needn't delve that profoundly, and they proceed. Yet that's precisely the opposite approach. That barrier marks the spot where authentic acquisition commences. My response upon striking that barrier proves straightforward. I return to the origin. I reopen the manual. I re-examine the portion I'd assumed I'd mastered, but currently I'm examining it uniquely. I'm not examining to gather data. I'm examining to address the exact void I've newly identified. I'm examining with an inquiry forefront, and this alters everything. Observe, initially when you acquire knowledge, you're attempting to ingest all simultaneously. It's daunting. Yet upon returning with a precise inquiry, for what reason does the setup attain balance? You're akin to an investigator seeking a single specific hint. You skim beyond the content you already grasp, and abruptly you spot the line or section that resolves your inquiry. It stands out vividly, and now you truly absorb it since you required it. Afterward, I return to my empty sheet of paper and attempt once more. And I advance somewhat farther till I encounter another barrier. Then I return to the origin once more. And I repeat this repeatedly till I can describe the entire matter from beginning to end in plain speech that anybody might track. Now, you could believe this appears laborious, and occasionally it proves so, but this is what I've discovered. It actually proves quicker than how majority study, since majority peruse their manuals or notes repeatedly, marking items, creating study cards, attempting to commit to memory. They invest countless hours and ultimately, they still lack true comprehension. They've simply improved at identifying the content upon viewing it. Yet when employing this technique, when compelling yourself to articulate it using your personal terms, you're accomplishing a far stronger action. You're not committing another's description to memory. You're constructing your personal insight from basics upward, and such insight endures. You won't lose it days following the test. It integrates into your thought process. Permit me to offer an illustration unrelated to physics, since I believe this extends to all things, not merely sciences. Suppose you wish to grasp democracy's functioning, not merely the meaning. You might search that in moments, but truly grasp it. How would you achieve that? Well, you might peruse volumes on democracy. You might study divisions of authority, safeguards and equilibria, elected governance, everything, and you could sense you've grasped it. But attempt this alternative. Retrieve an empty sheet of paper and describe to a fictional individual why democracy generally functions superior to autocracy, avoiding political cliches, avoiding citations from originators. Simply describe it using your personal terms from fundamental ideas. You could commence jotting something such as democracy functions since folks elect their rulers. Fine, but why proves that superior? Since then the rulers must fulfill what folks desire. But must they? What prevents them from disregarding folks' desires after election? Well, they'll face removal via vote subsequently. But suppose they alter regulations preventing removal via vote. What prevents such alteration? Observe the process. You're uncovering the voids, and those voids house the fascinating inquiries. Why require an autonomous legal system? Why proves press liberty vital in democracy? Why require serene power handovers? These aren't merely vague notions. They're resolutions to particular issues you identify when attempting to assemble the idea from nothing. And upon returning to read on democracy currently following your personal struggles with such inquiries, all connects in a manner it hadn't previously. You're not merely committing democracy facts to memory. You grasp why its structure exists as it does. This represents my intent regarding the distinction between identifying a concept and comprehending the concept. Identifying proves simple. Comprehending demands effort. Yet it's the sort of effort that truly advances you. Now, another element exists here that I consider essential. While describing something using basic speech, you cannot conceal via technical terms. Technical terms prove beneficial. Occasionally they serve as abbreviations enabling specialists to converse effectively. But they also pose a snare since they permit self-deception into believing you comprehend something when you're merely acquainted with the terms. I'll offer an illustration from my discipline. In quantum physics, we discuss wave function breakdown. Learners acquire this expression. They employ it within formulas. They might succeed in tests on it, but request they describe its actual significance, what's truly occurring materially, and majority cannot since they've acquired employing the expression sans ever constructing an authentic cognitive representation of its meaning. Similar occurrences arise in all disciplines. In healthcare, physicians discuss idiopathic ailments. Do you grasp idiopathic's meaning? It signifies we lack knowledge of its cause, but it appears far grander than stating we lack knowledge. In commerce, folks discuss collaboration and refinement and utilizing fundamental strengths. What do such expressions truly signify? Frequently zilch particularly definite. They're merely soothing terms permitting evasion of rigorous, precise cognition. When compelling yourself to describe something sans technical terms, you cannot achieve that. You must genuinely comprehend the proceedings. And if unable to describe it plainly, that's an indicator. It's an indicator you lack comprehension as thoroughly as assumed. Now, I must inform you this proves ego-deflating. Upon initially undertaking this earnestly, I felt astonished by how numerous items I'd assumed I'd mastered but truly hadn't. As a physicist, I've received honors. I've instructed at institutions. Yet upon settling to describe fundamental ideas using basic speech, I discovered deficiencies in my comprehension everywhere. But that's positive. That's the objective. The aim isn't sensing intelligent. The aim proves actually becoming capable. And capability arises from self-honesty regarding knowns and unknowns. Another aspect I've observed concerning this acquisition method exists. Upon comprehending something profoundly sufficiently to describe it plainly, you commence spotting links previously unseen. You commence observing identical fundamental concepts appearing in varied settings. A fridge's operation isn't truly so dissimilar from an air conditioner's operation or a thermal machine's operation. They all merely shift power utilizing identical fundamental notions. And upon truly comprehending such fundamental notions, you can resolve fresh scenarios sans committing every particular instance to memory. This represents folks' intent when discussing foundational ideas cognition. Although I dislike that expression since it appears grander than reality. It's merely master the fundamentals thoroughly and all else simplifies. I formerly had learners approach me saying, "Professor Feynman, I've perused this section thrice and still fail to grasp it." And I'd inquire, "Have you attempted composing your personal description?" Typically, they hadn't. They believed perusing equaled acquiring knowledge. But perusing merely initiates. Comprehension arises from interacting with content, grappling with it, attempting to rebuild it within your cognition. Occasionally they'd state, "But I lack sufficient knowledge to describe it currently." And I'd inform them, that's precisely the reason to attempt describing it. Since attempting description reveals unknowns, you needn't await comprehension to describe. You describe for comprehension. It's akin to the ancient adage, "You lack true knowledge till teachable." But I'd extend beyond. You lack true knowledge till teachable to someone unspeaking your dialect, unsharing your presumptions. That's the evaluation. And this is what I find wonderful here. It functions for all, not merely scholarly topics. You might employ this for grasping your vehicle's operation, or economy's operation, or spousal relations operation. Anything meriting comprehension merits attempting plain terms, description. Permit me to share another observation. Upon describing matters thus, you frequently conclude with a description differing from manual. Not incorrect, merely differing. You approach from alternate perspective, employ alternate comparisons, stress alternate elements, and that's acceptable. Actually, that's superior to acceptable since such description belongs to you. You constructed it. You comprehend each component's purpose since you placed it personally. This opposes majority education. Majority education attempts providing another's comprehension pre-bundled and finished. Peruse this. Commit that. Here's cognition method. But comprehension doesn't convey thus. You cannot merely upload another's comprehension into your mind. You must construct personally. Consider thus. If aiming to instruct cooking, I might provide recipes. I might specify precise components, precise heat, precise duration. And following my directions exactly, you'd likely produce something acceptable. But you wouldn't truly grasp cooking since initially something erred, lacking a component or oven overheats or desiring double quantity, you'd remain bewildered. But if alternatively I instructed regarding heat-altering proteins, salt-boosting tastes, fat-transporting scents, acid-countering heaviness, if I instructed principles, then you could resolve personally, you could adapt, you could invent, you wouldn't require my recipes further. That's this acquisition techniques action. It instructs principles. It compels comprehending actual operations, not merely sequences. And this is the matter. This isn't merely beneficial for acquiring topics. It's beneficial for existence. Since existence perpetually presents scenarios absent from manuals, fresh issues, unforeseen obstacles, unseen matters previously. And if lifetime spent committing others' resolutions, you're unprepared. But if lifetime spent comprehending cognition from basics upward, if practiced dismantling and reassembling using personal terms, then you manage innovation. You resolve, I believe this truly represents education's purpose. Not stuffing minds with data, not preparing test success, but instructing cognition, inquiry, comprehension, self-honesty regarding knowns and unknowns. And it commences with something basic like empty paper sheet and readiness admitting possible incomplete comprehension. That's everything required. That readiness for error, for incompleteness, for ongoing acquisition. Since here's the confidential, we're all ongoing acquisition. Each individual. World's cleverest remains perplexed regarding majority matters. The distinction merely some admit and some feign otherwise. I devoted entire existence perplexed. Remains so. But I've acquired comfort with such perplexity since I recognize it's fleeting. I recognize that upon settling with empty paper sheet and progressing gradually using basic speech, ultimately it'll connect. Perhaps not presently, perhaps not this period, but ultimately. That's the authentic teaching here. I believe comprehension isn't sorcery. It's not innate presence or absence. It's merely effort. Enduring, modest, sincere effort, attempting description, identifying blockage, returning, attempting repeatedly till it connects. And upon connecting, upon finally truly comprehending something, upon describable plainly and basically, upon visible throughout, that's among world's finest sensations. Not since it renders you exceptional, but since it signifies you've accomplished something authentic. You've appended to self. You've developed. And you can accomplish that with anything, anytime. You never cease capability for acquisition. You merely must readiness retrieving that empty paper sheet and commence composing.